Today we have a far-ranging lesson on communication. We'll start pretty soon here with proxemics, which is about space between us and touch. We'll also examine the idea of, are you instructing or are you persuading? And of course, you're doing a little bit of both all the time. And then we'll get to some of the mechanics of preparing a presentation. Although you'll see that most of these are with the idea of giving your walk and talk presentation. You can apply these even to print material. And which did you answer? Herd animals or territorial? I think you're going to find that we're a little bit of both. All right, proxemics, an interesting word for the times right now. It is about interpersonal space. So folks who study this have given us some categories. Let's take a look at them. Intimate zone. This is a contact to about 2 feet. People really like to control who gets into this zone, so be careful when you're out there presenting, walking around, giving talks, whether it's ranger station or at a conference. Yeah, the intimate zone is pretty close to us. It does change within cultures. I know I've had students from other countries that feel like Americans are pretty standoffish, and they like an even bigger distance than they might back in their own home country. Sorry if some of these captions at the bottom are getting cut off by the square at the bottom. So personal zone still is a thing that people want to protect. So there can be some problems. This is in a national monument where people are practicing using a quill pen to find out what it was like in the time of Lewis and Clark to try to write. So it's a pretty tiny table that they're using there. You might consider doing that on a bigger table. The people that chose to do it, did move right in, but it might keep other people from even trying the project you're trying to present. This social zone of 4 feet to 12 feet, a good thing to keep in mind when you're setting up a program. If you're behind a desk at a visitor center, maybe the desk works as some of your footage. But a social zone of 4 to 12 feet, you get beyond that, it's pretty hard to hear each other. So think about setting up your presentations, especially, so that as much as possible, people are at least 4 feet back. But beyond 12 feet, unless it's a really formal set of chairs, starts becoming difficult. Now, I hope you start watching, paying attention. Of course, right now we're under other reasons for staying 12 feet apart, but do watch people. This is a very intimate place in a national monument, Fort Clatsop, which is a rebuild of what they think Lewis and Clark stayed in as they wintered over on the Pacific. But yeah, watching people, people, especially Americans, can be pretty protective of their space. So here's a review in case you couldn't see all those numbers on the previous slide. So I'll leave that there for a second. Then we have the more than just space, but actually touching and making decisions about whether we touch or not. It's been a hot topic in America in the last 2 years, so we need to be considering it too in our presentations. So this was pretty interesting. You can see on the right, the person in the white shirt and the hat is presenting on canoeing. This is a canoeing class. And it was interesting looking at these pictures later, noticing how people were very careful to spread themselves out there between about 2 and 4 feet between every individual. So we're back to that writing table at Fort Clatsop. And yeah, here we have siblings. No problem there if they're bumping into each other. So it worked out for them. I've been giggling over this picture for over a dozen years. 6th grade graduation, and look how careful these 6th graders, 11, 12-year-olds, are to make sure they never touch. So these are going to be generalizations. They aren't going to be true for everyone. Personality certainly makes a difference on this. But in general, looking at some statistics that people have gathered. Women tend to allow a closer approach from the sides than from the front. And women are more likely to sit side by side to converse. You aren't going to see two men pull into a booth very often, say at a restaurant, and sit side by side. Men are a lot more comfortable face to face. So again, considering angle of approach in general, women are more comfortable with closer physical presence, especially with each other. And men prefer a frontal approach. You can say this is a defensive thing. Yeah, who knows where it comes from? Again, personality makes a difference. Extroverts prefer to be a little bit closer. You might know people who violate that pretty regularly. I had a friend, a guy I've known for 40 years, but he likes to be right within less than a foot of your face. So that's his personality. It's not the common. Another friend of mine, extremely extroverted, enough that he made the inside cover of Outside magazine. Uh, this is up in Alaska, which is where I first met him. Yeah, his hair froze. It's like minus 30 in the hot springs here. And he just has that extroverted personality that just is very charming, fortunately. But yeah, he doesn't think about personal space quite the same way that I do, a much more introverted person. So you got to watch your audience, see what they're comfortable with. So, why are we worried about this with our conversations and our interactions with the public? Uh, Especially because we're crossing so many personalities and cultures, you still want to have an idea of what people are comfortable with. Yes, of course, on a backpacking trip, it can also be odor. So, problems, violations, what do they cause? Things to think about. Uh, if people are more concerned about where you're standing, whether you're going to touch them, things like that, then yeah, it's a distraction from what it is that you're trying to say. Think of the used car salesman that often just stands much too close, or at least the classic idea of a used car salesman, not the ones I've met lately. Decreasing trust can be a problem because, why are they so close to you? Appearing manipulative can be part of the nonverbal interaction that's going on. And if you're uncomfortable, or if you make someone else uncomfortable, uh, they're going to be less cooperative about what you're teaching or about the national park or whatever your topic is. So we're going to talk about persuasion. Rhetoric is the art of persuasion, and we're going to see what we think here. So you might not have ever thought about it because it's so often the two are going together, but are you really working on instruction, or are you really trying to persuade someone to do something? Instruction, this is giving a person skills and information and knowledge. Uh, we do an awful lot of that at a university. Versus, are we trying to affect their behaviors? Or are we really trying to persuade them, change their attitudes, change some behaviors, rather than just giving them instruction? In which case, we need to make our presentations a little bit different. So let's take a look at instruction techniques. These are going to be a lot more familiar to you. And we remember Tilden's principle number 4 is about persuasion. So we need to be looking at rhetoric for a little while here. But first of all, instruction techniques that should look familiar to you. So here's Kolb's learning cycle. Your leadership class probably talks about it. I know I've mentioned it at least once. Experience, you take an experience that people have, then you sit down together and you reflect on what you learned from that experience, and then you turn around and generalize it so that it can be then applied to other situations. Whole part whole is a common instructional technique. You describe the big thing that you're about to teach them, you break it down into pieces, and then you put it back together again. So think about a ski lesson. You describe what a turn is about, and then You break it down into individual pieces, where your knee is, where your foot is, where the angle of the ski is against the snow surface, where your weight shifts from one leg to the other. Yeah, so breaking it down into all those parts. Then people think they've got too much to do, so you have to put it back together again as a whole. This is a common technique also: discuss, demonstrate, do. So yeah, you give it the description and then demonstrate what it is, whether it's a math problem or again, back to skiing. And then you have your learners do it. Building on previous knowledge, yeah, you got to be careful to not start too deep into a subject. Uh, Many people might be ready for you to dive into the middle of a lesson, but you need to do a little bit of a review at the beginning and build on that previous information, making sure they have that previous information before you construct new information. Memorize and recall, pretty classic stuff. How else do you learn the alphabet? How else do you learn math problems? So yeah, it's specific to certain things, but yeah, we do use that technique in instruction. All right, looking at the other side, persuasion. This is going to be a little bit different. It's not so knowledge information heavy. Persuasion, motivation, provoke. What are we trying to provoke here? Yes, especially in a national park, we want people to behave well. Sometimes we want them to just have a different perspective, that maybe they're very utilitarian and you want them to think more on the preservation side. And especially again in national parks, we are thinking about connecting people to the environment. That's different than information. We're trying to persuade them instead that the environment, the place that they're in, the place that you love, is what's important. So some persuasion techniques. One we may get to, I'm not sure this semester, we're kind of running out of time. And anyway, there are judgmental heuristics, and there's a set that is abbreviated as rascals. So judgmental heuristics, if we don't get back to it, hopefully we will in another class. You've already had the class on the authority of the resource technique. That's really a lot about persuasion with information embedded in it. And then the one that we're going to talk about here is the one promoted long ago by Aristotle, 2,000 plus years ago, breaking it down into ethos, pathos, and logos. If you've had a rhetoric class before, it's a pretty common topic. Ethos. Yes, you need to convince them that you're a person worth listening to. Telling them that isn't usually the best way to do it, just announcing how wonderful you are. Instead, it's something that you build with your audience, although an awful lot of it comes pretty immediately. First impressions, people are pretty good judges of first impressions, but you can keep working on it. And a lot of it, as I say here, comes from how you say things, how believable you are, rather than talking about yourself. Pathos, or emotions. People learn best when they're emotionally connected. And we do need to find ways to not just give information, but we also want to connect to people emotionally. So here's a quote. If it's wild to your own heart, protect it, preserve it, love it, and fight for it, and dedicate yourself to it, whether it's a mountain range, your wife, your husband, or even, heaven forbid, your job. It doesn't matter if it's wild to anyone else. If it's what makes your heart sing, if it's what makes your days soar like a hawk in the summertime, then focus on it. Because for sure it's wild, and if it's wild, it'll mean you're still free, no matter where you are. A lot of emotional words in there, good things to use. Logos. So, according to Aristotle, critically important, but it's really the last of the important ways of connecting to people. So, using logic. Logic is helpful. It's even necessary, but unless they believe in you and you can reach them emotionally, logic is least likely to change their mind on anything. It might be helpful for instruction, But when it comes to persuasion, you've got to be accurate or people don't trust you. But logical arguments aren't always the best way to convince people of something. So, within Tilden, in the class, we're talking about organized, presenting a whole thing, not leaving things hanging, not introducing things you never get to. And it's best if we can get our most important message in here. That's a really logical thing to do, but that most important message might also be emotional. Because you've all made it to a university, you're very used to being high in logic, which is great when you're learning information. So, but it's easily overdone when you're outdoors in a more conversational, casual communication. So, especially if people ask you very specific, pointed questions, you might be answering them in pure logic. But be careful of the other people in the audience that might not be quite so interested in those little details. So here's a quote I will read for you. I even struggle reading it. Really heavy in logic, not terribly emotionally connecting to the person if you were speaking this. The first task of park management is the preservation and maintenance as exactly as possible of the natural scenery. The restriction, that is to say, within the narrowest limits consistent with the necessary accommodation of visitors, of all constructions markedly inharmonious with the scenery, or which would unnecessarily obscure, distort, or detract from the dignity of the scenery. In the interest in which natural scenery inspires, the attention is aroused and the mind occupied without purpose, without continuation of the common process of relating to the present action, thought, or perception to some future end. There is little else that has this quality so purely. Now, is anyone going to listen to you through that? Really, read that again on your own, pause here. And what is he trying to say? And what he's really saying is that in beautiful places, you stop, you pause, and you let your mind enter it. It's just a mindfulness state that we can really enjoy. But did you get that the first time you read it? Okay, butterflies. Yes, we're going to all get those. And the sooner you get them, the better, because you'll probably prepare better. And that's one of the best things you can do for the butterflies. Expect them. They can give you the edge. Yes, you're really nervous, just like before a race. But once you get going, hopefully you'll settle into your presentation. So one of the things that can help is to remember this isn't about you. It's really about your audience. So, and it's next about your park, your information, whatever it is you're presenting. You might not be at a park, but yeah, stop thinking that it's about you. It's really about them. It's about your information, your topic, your persuasion. Sorry about that. All right, mechanics, things about preparing your talk. You won't be preparing a talk. You no longer will be preparing a talk for this class. But you can still apply an awful lot of this to your storyboards that you are going to create. We talked about this with some of the videos from Timpanogos. Foreshadowing is a great thing. Giving transitions makes people want to turn that page or listen a little bit longer. Incorporating mystery is required, meaning you're going to have questions that you don't quite answer, and you're going to answer them later. But yeah, do get back to them if you presented a mystery for somebody, a puzzle to solve. People love puzzles and mysteries. Stand in front, face your audience. Yeah, if you're a shyer person, you're tempted to, especially if you're doing a slide presentation, to stand behind them and talk forward, but don't. Get out there, get where they can see you. Conversational tone, we are an informal area, that of interpretation. So memorizing a talk sounds really formal. So yes, try to have it as a conversation and incorporate visitors' comments and follow where they send you, which is part of why you want to know an awful lot more than just what you plan on presenting. Yes, there it is, smile. You'll engage your people a lot better if you can have a pleasant, joyful conversation. Part of the techniques of introduce uh, yourself very quickly, get out of the way. Do spend more time welcoming your visitor, talking with them. Maybe you learned something from them earlier that you want to bring up. And remember again, especially helping with butterflies, that you're working not for yourself, but for an organization, for nature, for whatever the topic is you're working on. So continuing on very quickly, I'm not even going to describe all of these. So avoid distracting body movements. Some people have funny ways of standing around up front, playing with stuff that can be distracting. Visual aids, yeah, Tilden says we got to have them. First, lost the word, sorry. Um, First objects as part of the presentation. So using visual aids effectively and not overdoing it. Okay. Yeah, we've talked about all semester long sticking to a theme, not going beyond our topic and organizing around a theme. Overdoing content, that happens at university classes. It's happening right now between you and me. And in a less formal situation where it's more persuasion, less instruction, watch out for the content. You're in the habit at a university of overdoing it. Yeah, enthusiasm makes a big difference. So people know when you're not excited about something, or you might even be excited, but you're going to have to put on a little bit of a presentation, do some acting if it's a little bit out of your character. With time, you'll get better at it. Watching the videos that we've seen of other park rangers lets you see what it's like. You are doing your relevancy and trajectory video presentation that you'll be talking in, and you'll find that your normal conversational voice uh, is pretty exciting when it's live because you've got eye connections, there's all kinds of messages in your face. But when you're just being heard, you're going to have to change your voice from its normal voice and think about being more excited. So yeah, we talked about ethos, pathos, logos. So speaking from the heart, being positive, being excited improves your presentation. And on a written storyboard, you're just going to have to use words that are very positive, more emotional. Yeah, presenting in a room, presenting to an audience outdoors, looking above people irritates them. Looking below them makes you look like you don't really want to talk to them. So get in the habit of always looking around at about eye level and actually locking in on different people, whether they're looking at you or not. Other people will see that you're locking into other people. And yes, it's very helpful for direct communication. Friendly conversational tone is most of our life. So if you're nervous, you're going to be headed toward a more formal, rigid, single tone voice. Instead, do try to make it a conversation, a very real conversation where you do ask questions, you do listen to answers. And one of the nice things of coming early to a presentation is getting to talk to people and connecting to the past or what they did that day or what they're hoping to do tomorrow. Okay, here we go. Really too heavy on logic. Things though that we've talked about in class a number of times. Using stories. Stories tend to be emotional. You tend to get excited about them. Uh, they're often funny, or emotional. So yes, use stories quite a bit. Um, Calm down your language from what a university might use. Yes, and when you're presenting, vary your tone, your pace. Pick, when it's really excited, talk a lot faster, and then when it's time for them to think about it, go ahead and slow your speech down. I certainly am overdoing the ums in these presentations. Volume, what lower voices, not because you were born with a lower voice, but the lower end, the lower range of the voice that you have is going to carry a little bit better. So even if you have a higher pitched voice, use the lower part of your voice. It will carry, it will fill space better. Yep, always watching your audience, getting feedback from them, answering their questions, deliberately giving them space, stopping, pausing, giving them time to ask questions, and uh, will make the whole presentation more conversational. Uh, yes, we like lots of hands-on demonstrations, participations, and do include those activities with your storyboard. Even though you won't be there with them, you can have them do activities with each other. Okay, our SAM handbook is very good at giving you information on how to prepare a talk, how to prepare storyboards, signs, posters. Yeah, the book is way out of date. There is a new copy. I just don't have it uh, built into the class yet. A new copy of the SAM handbook that's a little more updated. But in many ways, I like the old one better for my preview so far. So things we've done in class already is start with a topic. We did this with Mill Creek, and then narrow that topic down. Many of you came to me with a topic that I said, no, this is just too big. We got to shrink it. We can't cover that whole topic. So shrink it down a little bit. So, the idea of a national forest in Big Cottonwood is huge. You can't cover that in a whole manner in a 15-minute presentation or an hour or even a semester. So narrowing it down, okay, we're going to be a visitor at Silver Lake. So let's narrow it down to visitor activities at Silver Lake. So we're still in the topic stage. And then we want to give it a theme. We want to give it an angle, something that ties everything together. And often you end up coming up with your theme later uh, as you're gathering information. You go, oh, okay, this ties everything together. So for an example here, explore the changing stories seen at Silver Lake region. So we're going to be talking about changes and discovering things right there at Silver Lake. So now we've got a topic of things we can tie together by looking at changes over time, over distance at Silver Lake. Then you're going to try to summarize your talk very as short as possible. So here's the first sentence. To explore the boardwalks and trails around Silver Lake is to discover changes in the environment from the Ice Age through this morning. So continuing on here with the SamHam material, going to go much more quickly. Step 5, pretty classic stuff here. Just prepare an outline of what you hope to cover. Then prepare the conclusion of your talk, tying everything together. And then not until you have those done, first the outline, then the full body, then the conclusion, can you really write the introduction. So it's sort of you're doing the middle first and then the conclusion next and writing the beginning at the end, sort of a funny order, 2, 3, 1. So then rearrange them and keep practicing your talk. And maybe you won't even come up with a good title until after you've presented it a few times and you go, okay, this is really what ties it together. And speaking of tying it together, you do need to repeat your theme several times. It might feel absurd to you, but you'll be really lucky if people go home remembering one thing from your presentation. So make sure it's the one thing that ties everything together.